Hi YouTube, this is Raven. I'm a survivor of a 16-year marriage to a covert narcissist, and now I'm attempting to divorce a narcissist, easier said than done. And I've done a series of videos called Narcissists Are Ridiculous. I think I've done 3 videos now. This is video number 4. And when I'm saying narcissists are ridiculous, I'm not saying that every single narcissist in the world does the things that I say in these videos. I'm actually talking about my narcissist, my soon-to-be ex-husband and his crazy narc family, because they are ridiculous and they do absurd, crazy things. And this is kind of how I deal with, difficult things in my life, especially the abuse that I've suffered because of these people. I deal with it through humor and pointing out absurdity. And one of the things I noticed about my narc and his family is that they take everything to the extreme. There can never be a happy medium, between let's do this or let's do that. My narc mother-in-law used to say, everything in moderation. Just take everything in moderation. But there was nothing moderate about her life. She didn't take things in moderation. If she's going to have a glass of wine, she's going to have a whole bottle of wine. If she's going to have a hamburger, she's not going to have, the little small hamburger from McDonald's. She's going to have, 2 or 3 Big Macs. There's nothing in moderation. And my in-laws are overweight, but in their minds, this is the ridiculous part, they think that they're extremely skinny and in the epitome of health. And it's an oxymoron that they think that they're so healthy and that they give advice to everyone. My mother-in-law is a nurse, so she loves to give out, nutrition and health advice, even though she doesn't do it. And, one of the things is that, they managed to raise 3 children who have unhealthy relationships with food and who are overweight, who've struggled with their weight. But yet, they still, do these things. Like, for instance, I lived with my narc in-laws before I got married, which, big mistake there. I'll have to do a video sometime on that. They still think I killed their cat. I'll have to do a video on that too. But some nights, when she didn't feel like cooking, she would have her husband bring home dinner, and he would go to Outback. And if you don't live in the United States, Outback is a steakhouse that's supposed to be Australian themed, but it's anywhere but Australian themed. But they have a appetizer called a bloomin' onion. And it's this gigantic onion that they chop up to where it opens up like a flower. And they batter it and they deep fry it, and it comes out, and it looks almost like, a baby octopus that's been deep fried, or, the Kraken. And, you dip it in this mayonnaise-based sauce. And they would bring that home for dinner. That was all they were going to eat for dinner. And they're shoving this deep fried onion in their mouth. They got this mayonnaise-based stuff all over their mouths. And at the same time, while they're eating this, they'd be talking about health. About health food, like, that you're supposed to eat, vegetables every day. While I'm sitting there, with, my healthy meal that I've cooked myself, watching them just, shove this into their mouths. I'm like, oh my God, when is the heart attack going to happen? Is one of them going to fall down? I'm going to have to start CPR. But, they, in their minds, they were skinny. And, they would always make fun of other family members that were overweight. They made fun of, my husband's uncle, and he had been in the Air Force, and he had gotten hurt, something had happened, and he had to retire from the Air Force, and he had been on chronic steroids for years. And if you've ever been on steroids, it's like you gain weight. You cannot lose weight on steroids. It's impossible. And he was overweight, and they made fun of him constantly, that he was overweight. And it was very sad because he was trying his best to lose weight. And when he finally did start to lose weight, he found out it was because he had cancer, and it had metastasized all over his body. So he only had like a year to live. And they still made fun of him. They were still making fun of him, like, well, he got cancer because he's fat. He's overweight. That's why he has cancer. And I'm like, she's a nurse. She knows better. She knows that, if cancer was caused by being fat, there would be, America's one of the fattest nations in the world. We wouldn't have cancer anymore because everyone, who's fat would have cancer and probably die. But, they push these attitudes onto their children. especially my sister-in-law. She was overweight. She struggled with her weight all her life. And she has diabetes. And I think she probably had diabetes from when she was younger too, but it wasn't diagnosed until she was an adult. And my narc mother-in-law was convinced that she didn't have, run-of-the-mill diabetes. She had to have a special diabetes, because, she couldn't just have run-of-the-mill diabetes. And so she took her from doctor to doctor to doctor, and, the doctors were telling her, it's like, no, she has diabetes. No, she has diabetes. And so finally, she was convinced that her daughter needed weight loss surgery. But my sister-in-law didn't qualify for weight loss surgery because she didn't have a large enough BMI, body mass index. So instead of, my narc mother-in-law celebrating this, that, oh, good, my daughter doesn't need surgery. We can just lose weight with diet and exercise, because that's, in medicine, that's what you want. I'm in nursing school. And, you always want to take the least invasive approach. If you can solve a health problem through diet and exercise, you don't want to put the patient through an invasive procedure like surgery. But instead, she encouraged her daughter to gain weight, and she's making her eat all these things to gain weight so she could have this weight loss surgery. And of course, she had the lap band, and she nearly died. She had all kinds of complications. But, and they pushed this attitude onto my narc husband. And when he was younger, he would tell me how he would come home from school. He was a latchkey kid. And he would make himself a peanut butter sandwich for a snack. And he would try to put as much of the peanut butter from the jar onto the bread, to where he would make a sandwich that was this thick with peanut butter, and then try to shove the entire thing in his mouth. And I remember thinking, that's so gross. I can't imagine eating something like that. But, he takes everything to the extreme. Well, he would, anytime, early on in our marriage, when we would go out somewhere, there'd be a cookout for somebody, and, they're making hamburgers, he would try to get as many hamburger patties as he could get on a bun, 4 or 5. One time he had like 4 or 5 of them, shove it down and try to get it into his mouth. And, I've got everybody else from, staring at me like, oh my God, that's disgusting. You're here with him. And, but this was his attitude towards food, that food was a comfort. And you had to see how much you could, shove in your mouth at once. And, finally he decided he was going to lose weight. But of course, he took it to the extreme, just like everything else he did in his life. He bought a body bug, which is a thing that tracks your calories. It goes on your upper arm. And, so he's tracking his calories. But then he decides he's going to get a treadmill. And he goes and he buys a treadmill, and he builds a surround sound speaker system around it, and monitors, and he's got a place for his keyboard so he could work while he was running. And he would run for 2 hours a day. And then he would complain, like, my knees are hurting. I don't know why my knees and my hips are hurting. I was like, maybe it's because you're running 2 hours a day and you're not an athlete, you're fat, and your knees can't take it. Oh, no, that's not it. I must be developing a connective tissue disorder like my mother. So, a normal person, would say, okay, the recommended rate of weight loss is 1 pound per week. You decrease your calories by 500 a day. And, that's 3,500 calories per week. That's 1 pound per week. And you increase your activity by 30 minutes a day, like you walk at lunch. But, oh, no. He was going to decrease his calories by 1,000 a day. And he's running 2 hours a day. And so, of course, he screws up his metabolism. And he lost a lot of weight. But then, of course, the body is smart. And the body will figure it out. And if you continually eat less and less and less, the body gets efficient. And it goes into starvation mode to keep you from starving to death. So, you may be eating 1,000 calories a day, but you're not losing any weight because your body is holding on to that fat and holding on to those calories. Well, he was convinced then that, there was just something wrong, So he stops eating regular food, and he's drinking protein shakes and these protein bars. And, he's starting to gain weight again. So then he goes on YouTube, of all places, and sees a video of this guy telling you that you need to drink 3 glasses of wine a day and eat like so many calories. And I'm like, wine has calories. You see from your mother that wine has calories, because she drinks about a bottle a day and she's overweight. But, so he tries that, and, that doesn't work. He continues to gain weight to where now, he's up to, he's back to what he was before we got married, and he's gained even more weight. But, there was a time when he was losing weight. He went up to his sister, and she was having trouble with her lap band at that point. And he said, Isn't weight loss fun? And she looked at him with this go to hell stare, like, your weight loss and mine are two different things. And she said that because at the time her life was miserable. She could not keep anything down. She was sick all the time because the lap band was eating a hole in her esophagus. And I told him, it's like, this is, what you said to her was insulting. Well, I didn't mean to be insulting. See, now I think he did. I think he was being a smartass and he was insulting his sister. But, he didn't see that. Well, now, of course, he has gained back, all the weight. And he's huge compared to what he was while we were still married. And, I like to think that it's karma, but I really think this is self-inflicted. But he's dating someone, while we're still married, and he's living with her, who's big, like he is. And this comes from the same man who told me when we first started dating, I don't date fat chicks. And then, when I asked him why, like, oh, it's because they have emotional problems, and I wouldn't want to date a woman who's emotionally unstable and doesn't have a good self-image. It's like bullcrap. He was just being a pig. But, I think it's funny now that, after he was running for 2 hours a day, I think now the only place he runs to is a buffet. But in his mind, this is the ridiculous part, I think he still sees himself as skinny. He thinks that he's skinny just like his narc parents do, because narcs are not self-aware. They don't have self-awareness. They don't see themselves the way other people do. And that makes them ridiculous. All right. That's all for now. Be vigilant. Be safe. Take care.